and welcome to Around the Air Force. I'm Master Sergeant Robbie Yard. We're here at the 36th Annual Air Force Association Air Warfare Symposium in Orlando, Florida. This year's theme is Multi-Domain Operations, from Vision to Reality. More than 80 top companies in cutting-edge air, space, and cyber technologies participated in this year's Technology Exposition. The Air Warfare Symposium brings Air and Space Force leaders together with industry partners and leaders from Fortune 500 companies to inspire innovation. One of the guest speakers at this year's symposium is the nominee to be the next Air Force Chief of Staff, General Charles Brown. He's currently the commander of Pacific Air Force, and he took part in a panel about Joint All-Domain Command and Control, or JADC2. JADC2 is the concept of connecting all available information to quickly target enemies on the battlefield.
With JADC2, the goal is to connect every sensor to every shooter. Okay, that's a great goal. But right now I want to make sure we can connect the right sensors to the right shooter as we're getting on the path to connecting all. Because we got to be able to fight today, next week, next month, next year, next decade. And it's going to take us a while to get there.
General Brown says he's truly humbled and honored by the nomination to serve as the Air Force's 22nd Chief of Staff. Secretary of the Air Force Barbara Barrett says General Brown has unmatched strategic vision and operational expertise. The Secretary was also at the symposium and spoke about her 4 priorities for the service.
We need a modern, smart, connected, strong Air and Space Force to deter and defend against aggression and to preserve precious freedom and peace. We have that in the United States Department of the Air Force today. Thank you very much.
To see full presentations from Air Force senior leaders, go to DivitsHub.net and search 2020 Air Warfare Symposium. And that's your look around the Air Force.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage AFA's Chairman of the Board, General Murray.
Thank you all. All right, well, it is now my honor to welcome for the very first time to an AFA event our new Secretary of the Air Force. Yes, indeed. Secretary Barbara Barrett leads the Department of the Air Force, comprising of both the U.S. Space Force and the U.S. Air Force, where she oversees 685,000 airmen. She has served in multiple leadership roles in the public service sector, and prior to assuming her current position, including serving as the U.S. Ambassador to Finland and Deputy Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. Interestingly, the Secretary, like me, grew up on a farm before the age of 10, she could ride a horse, milk a cow, and drive a car. I'd like to say I could do that too, ma'am. However, by the time that she was 30, she was the senior executive of 2 Fortune 500 companies. I didn't achieve that. She is also an instrument-rated pilot and trained for space flight. She has led roles in DACOWITS, the Defense Committee on Women in Service for Combat Roles. She taught leadership at Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and she is the president of Thunderbird School at Global Management. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome to the stage the 25th Secretary of the Air Force, Barbara Barrett. Ma'am.
Our adversaries are designing and acquiring capabilities intended to limit or deny the advantages of the United States and our allies, challenging our leadership in air, space, and cyberspace.
Thank you. Thanks.
To retain our competitive edge, we're modernizing our delivery platforms and weapon systems and investing in game-changing technologies. In support of the National Defense Strategy, we are working with Congress and our sister services, industry, academia, allies, and partners to find innovative solutions to future challenges. Tomorrow's threat requires our air and space forces to think and act faster than any adversary, connecting with the joint force to create the most highly networked military in history. We're pursuing an integrated design and fielding a modernized force that can connect with the joint force, dominate space, generate combat power, conduct logistics under attack, move to win. Our platforms and systems may be the best in the world, but our most valuable assets are our people. We are continuing our efforts to develop the joint leaders essential to our future force. Diverse, resilient, and ready airmen and space professionals are the bedrock of the department's readiness and lethality. Together, we are building the air and space force the nation needs, now and into the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Murray, the Air Force Association's Chairman of the Board, and our 14th Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. We profoundly appreciate your 29 years of service in the world's greatest Air Force. And thank you, General Wright and the AFA. Your impactful support of the Department of the Air Force makes us better every day, truly the force behind the force. Special welcome to our international allies and partners. Your teamwork makes the world safer for your children and our own. Most importantly, welcome and thank you to the airmen and space professionals who are here today. I'm excited to be here to talk, listen, and learn at an extraordinary time in history. Just in the last 4 months, the department has launched a new service, welcomed a record-breaking X-37B back to Earth, provided life-saving missile warnings to U.S. forces in Al-Assad, and taken the lead on JADC2 and on so much more. For the Air Force and now the Space Force, it's an exciting, historic time. I want to use my brief time here to look to the future. Speaking for the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Goldfein, Chief of Space Operations, General Raymond, and myself, I want to share our 4 top priorities. We want to build the United States Space Force, modernize the air and space forces we need, grow strong leaders and resilient families, and strengthen our global alliances and partnerships. So let's consider where we are and where we're headed. As you already heard from General Thompson, we are building the United States Space Force. Think back with me to 1969 when Neil Armstrong and Air Force fighter pilot Buzz Aldrin made those dusty footprints on the moon. America had the lead in space, and the USSR was our only near peer in that domain. In the intervening 5 decades, through American ingenuity and invention, we have engaged in that domain and become increasingly dependent upon space. Few Americans think about how reliant we are on space or how vulnerable our country's space assets are. But as you know, space is essential in today's American way of life. And as D.T. Thompson said, GPS enables everything from ATMs to weather and traffic reports to ride-sharing apps, from your phone's alarm clock to precision cameras and the gig economy. Today, navigation, communication, and information all depend on these aging, vulnerable, though brilliant GPS satellites. While space was a relatively peaceful and benevolent domain at the dawn of the space age, things have changed. In 2007, China menacingly shot down one of their own satellites, demonstrating their offensive capability and scattering thousands of pieces of dangerous space debris in orbit. Then, just over a year ago, China made ominous history by landing their rover on the dark side of the moon. Today, most of America's essential space assets are largely defenseless. That's why, in keeping with the NDAA, the President and the Secretary of Defense formed the United States Space Force. By launching the United States Space Force, the nation is renewing its commitment as the world's leader in space. We are building a U.S. Space Force that defends our assets in space, fields jam-resistant, resilient constellations, and is ready to respond if deterrent fails. Our next priority, we are committed to modernizing the air and space forces. The department is harnessing the power of technologies such as hypersonics, directed energy, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. We're fielding new weapons, such as the F-35 Lightning II, the B-21 Raider, the MH-139 Grey Wolf, and ground-based strategic deterrent. These platforms form the core of our future force, networked and projecting power through the JADC2 battle network that will connect all the services. If you reflect back on the 1960s, when the rescue community first welcomed the Jolly Greens, these capabilities were stuff of science fiction. Those Jolly Green heroes braved impossible conditions and enemy fire to rescue downed airmen from the jungles of Vietnam, 122 rescues in 1965 alone. Let me tell you about just one Jolly Green mission. Then Captain Barry Kamhout and his intrepid crew flew under fire into North Vietnam searching for downed Americans on 3 consecutive days. The CH-3s didn't have armor or drop tanks. Crews lashed extra fuel tanks in the cargo compartment. The choppers didn't have defensive systems or offensive weapons. Crew members carried M16s as their only defense. The aircraft had no radios or navigation equipment. Even several engine instruments were missing. Still, the Jolly Green crews never lacked audacity and courage. The American pilots they rescued over those 3 days are with us today and with their families due to the bravery and tenacity of the Jolly Greens. This giant of the Jolly Green community is with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Barry Kamhout. During the same conflict, then Staff Sergeant Wayne Fisk volunteered for a humanitarian mission. One dark night, Chief Fisk, a paramedic gunner on a Jolly Green, flew deep into the heart of enemy territory on a perilous prisoner of war search and rescue mission in Son Tay, North Vietnam. And on the return flight, he was a vital crew member during the rescue of a downed F-105 pilot. Ladies and gentlemen, this American hero, this living legend, Captain Fisk, is here today. Captain Fisk. The spirit of these heroes lives on in today's combat, search and rescue airmen. Ladies and gentlemen, crew members from a recent mission are also here. Jolly 4-1 and Jolly 4-2 demonstrated extraordinary bravery during a 2018 mission to rescue teammates and partner forces deep in Al-Shabaab territory. These crews flew into danger to support troops in contact. Despite an inoperative gun, a majority of their countermeasures already jettisoned, and degraded communications with the ground force commander. They engaged multiple enemy fighting positions, infilled on a hot LZ, and stabilized and evacuated multiple wounded patients. They flew into this peril because, as their Jolly Green motto states, these things we do that others may live. Colonel Kamhout, Chief Fisk, and the crews from the Jolly 4-1 and Jolly 4-2, would you please join me on stage? Americans owe these courageous airmen the very best equipment. The new combat rescue helicopter, the HH-60 Whiskey, improves range and survivability for safer search and rescue operations everywhere, every time. Ladies and gentlemen, in recognition of these heroes, the Air Force is naming our newest CSAR helicopter the Jolly Green II.
Jolly Green just picked up the survivor. Survivors on board. ETA 3 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, such extraordinary airmen from our history and in this room today drive our next priority. The Department of the Air Force is committed to growing strong leaders and resilient families. We are empowering people. On a recent visit to RAF Mildenhall, I met a group of airmen who built a full-scale mock-up of a KC-35 fuel cell outfitted with tools, cameras, and radios to create a versatile learning center. Another airman designed a digital toolbox that prevents loss, avoids injuries and FOD, and maintains tool accountability by digitally sensing and tracking tools. As CEO of the American Management Association and when teaching leadership at Harvard, I worked with many great leaders. In the past 4 months, I've heard from and visited thousands of airmen, and I'm impressed. Let me tell you, our airmen and space professionals are among the most talented leaders in the world. And I'm also impressed with the strength of the Air Force family, a culture that values every person. In a primitive post in Niger, I saw airmen form clubs, united over interests as diverse as jiu-jitsu and knitting. And members developed deep bonds as a result of these clubs. At the same time, our service members at home are connecting with their sections, their flights, their squadrons, and connecting on deeply personal levels. Air and Space Forces work miracles with their support of families. We're committed to strong, safe, and successful families. We work with state governors and legislators to enact occupational licensing reciprocity and to build first-rate schools and better communities for our families. Airmen and space professionals are building the world of tomorrow. We are revamping our talent management programs to build joint leaders. Air Force civilian and military, guardsmen and reserves continue to serve well beyond their time in the Air and soon Space Forces. Many of the people in this room who aren't in uniform today honed their leadership skills as part of the United States Air Force and are making a big difference in their communities. Finally, we're strengthening our global alliances and partnerships. One region pivotal to defense of America's homeland, the Arctic, exemplifies the need to deepen and strengthen our international relationships. As ambassador, I once flew in a Finnish Air Force F-18 to observe firsthand Finland's defense of Europe's longest border with Russia. Russian threats may keep Finland out of NATO membership, but they partner with us and they fly American-made F-18s. Historically, the Arctic has served as a strategic buffer, much as the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans insulated the country from attack in previous centuries. Today, however, the Arctic portends the probable enemy approach to our homeland. The Arctic is ground zero for missile defense in an era of great power competition focused in the Northern Hemisphere. Russia staked a claim to the northernmost latitudes. They're refurbishing abandoned airfields and rickety infrastructure while creating new bases and developing an integrated network of defenses. Although China is definitely not an Arctic country on any global map, they link Arctic claims to their One Belt, One Road initiative and betray their strategic ambitions in the Arctic. As in space, America is resolute in defending and protecting international norms of access and navigation as Arctic resources and sea routes gain importance. It is in the best interest of the United States to maintain a region of stability, common rules, and steady governance. This is a critical mission for the Department of the Air Force. Civilian airmen operate the Alaska radar system that scans the horizon 24/7 and the first line of defense against aggression over the pole. And the Arctic requires a total force effort, not just active duty Air Force and Space Force. The Alaska Air National Guard conducts search and rescue operations with Guardian Angels parachuting from helicopters and HC-130s. They also operate F-22s and C-17s from Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, along with KC-135s out of Eielson Air Force Base. A free and accessible Arctic, supported by allies and partners, is a benefit to all. That's why maintaining strong defense relationships with Arctic nations who are willing to cooperate is critical. We stand with Canada, Iceland, Norway, Finland, Sweden, and Greenland via Denmark. We are stronger together. So our mission is clear. We will build the United States Space Force, modernize the air and space forces we need, grow strong leaders and resilient families, and strengthen our allies and partners. Ladies and gentlemen, almost 40 years ago, President Reagan had a straightforward summary of American policy. He said, "The defense policy of the United States is based on a simple premise. The United States does not start fights. We are not the aggressor. We maintain our strength in order to deter and defend against aggression, to preserve freedom and peace." Ladies and gentlemen, our priorities can be summed up simply. We need a modern, smart, connected, strong air and space force to deter and defend against aggression and to preserve precious freedom and peace. We have that in the United States Department of the Air Force today. Thank you very much.
Ma'am, we can't thank you enough for giving us your clear priorities of being able to strengthen our air and space forces, and more importantly, our airmen and their families that we have. And certainly I well know and can attest for our first meeting over 15 years ago, the love you have for our airmen as well. So thank you so much. So ma'am, as our token, I have the honor again to be able to present this, well-coveted, socks of special edition. And of course, I know, as I highlighted earlier, the portrait there of Robert Emerson Bell that hangs in Wings Through Time there that gave us the opportunity. But thank you again. Thank you for being a part of our Air Force. Thank you for leading our Air and Space Force as you do.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Where are we going to
You could have a room full of people and they're all struggling with something mental health related, but everyone feels alone because no one talks about it.
We would like to message, I think, to the rest of the Air Force, Space Force now, DoD, as needed, the importance of combating the stigma of mental health. You know, I'm just in my first year of my own mental health story and experience. before finally going to mental health just this past year, I went to leadership a couple of times and said, hey, I'm not sure what's wrong. I think it might be this, but I don't know. I think I need to be seen, and I'm thinking going to mental health, and I just wanted to give you a heads up.
You were self-aware enough to go to your leadership and say, like, hey, there's a thing. I wasn't self-aware enough to go and say, hey, I've got this thing, right? It took kind of this culminating event. I was kind of blissfully unaware of kind of how my brain operated and what I dealt with until I wasn't. When I was in the depths of what I was going through with my mental health story, I reached out to my dad, who is a retired 28-year senior master sergeant, and he said, hey, don't go to mental health. I know that you're struggling. I hear you, but don't go. You're going to ruin your life. You're going to ruin everything that you've built for yourself. I knew a guy during Desert Storm. We were turning jets together, and he went to mental health. I never saw him again. When I went to mental health and they said, I understand what it is that you're dealing with, I was like, oh my goodness, cool. It's not just me. Other people deal with this too. And when people say, hey, this is going to impact my career, right? I'm still here. I didn't lose my job. I didn't get kicked out. I didn't get my security clearances pulled, right? And when people say it's going to affect you, I'll say, yes, it will affect you. You're going to be better than you've ever been, because by treating these things, you're going to take hurdles out of the way, and you're going to be allowed to operate and do things better than ever, and you're going to get recognized for it. Well, I think that if we could introduce the idea of treating mental health the same way that we treat physical health, things would be different. You would never see someone at the doctor's office with an injury and say, what are you doing? Oh, you hurt yourself? Like, you don't need to be here. If somebody were hurt, and because you can physically see it, you would never tell them to get back to work, continue to do these things, because you can see that they're hurt. It's different with mental health, but sometimes people still need to take a knee, and you need to let them recover, and you need to kind of make them be heard.
You know, Dustin compared it to a physical ailment or injury, and that's exactly what it is, right? It's harder to see because the organ that controls those things is, more of a mystery than, say, your tibia or your wrist. But the brain is an organ; it gets hurt just like anything else, and needs to see a medical personnel who specializes in that organ to get fixed.
You're going to have a better, more effective force when people know that you as a leader have their best interest in mind, and you're not only looking after their physical health, but their mental health.
I think Dustin has a very compelling story and tells it in a way that invites people to listen and to, I hope, follow suit and go get help if they need it. I go to mental health, and it's great. That sounds cheesy, right?
It does.
Yeah.
Your role as a leader in life is to just be hungry and on the lookout for where can I adjust the lens into a healthier position so people see the potential in themselves. People's insecurities are met with something of support. That as a leader, part of my job is to look for where I can adjust lenses, because I've got the ability to adjust that maybe in a unique way. And they'll listen to it. Maybe they'll lock it in a powerful way. So this guy pulls me aside after I've just had this failure moment in this tackling drill. And he goes, let me tell you something. What I just saw right there, that kind of effort, you sticking with the play no matter what happened to your uniform. Your equipment got all jacked up. I know it. I saw it. But you stuck with it. Let me tell you, that kind of effort makes great ball players. We're lucky to have you on this team. And I'm not the only one who just noticed that. All right, get back in line.
Yeah.
It didn't cost him nothing.
Right.
But man, the dude was tuned into the moment at hand. And as soon as he got up from his knee, because he was eyeball to eyeball, I'm walking to the back of the line going, I got a new purpose. Man, my lens is back in place. And my reflection now is, Coach, you thought that was good. Watch this. Yeah. And it went from hopeless to hopeful. Boom! Because of an unremarkable, what I call touch point moment. But the leader was paying attention.
Yeah.
When you read the book Why Air Forces Fail, you'll see in there there's no loss based on a lack of tactics, techniques, or procedures. It's always in your lack of ability to adapt to what's going on.
We have been in a competition in the Middle East, and we've done some great work, but ladies and gentlemen, nothing in that campaign has ever been an existential threat. Nothing in that endeavor has ever created any doubts in our mind about our ability to be world leaders. You have to think about this differently. Russia and China are autocratic, realist entities. They play by the rules of I win, you lose, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and the survival of the state is everything.
This is really more of a chess game. You can't try to win every move, but you have to avoid being put on the chessboard without options. You need to know how you get to checkmate on the enemy, and certainly when it comes time to maneuver on the board, you think more strategically. And so we step back and consider what's going on. You have to set a pace to build margin and to compete that is sustainable.
I think what you really have to grasp here is that you could find yourself in another 9/11 type event or another Pearl Harbor type event. And the intent isn't to go to war with you, it's to put you in such a strategic disposition and disadvantage that you now are on the horns of a dilemma. Do I back off and cede the sphere of influence? Or do I stick my face in the wood chipper? Either way, our image as the world leader has been tarnished irrevocably. And if you don't understand that to be the core issue with these two countries, then I think you need to think about them a little bit closer.
Doing this mission set, you can see the importance, but you can also see the difference between how everybody sees it in the world we're living in. I don't want to be the guy that says, hey, look, we're the #1 priority. I made a promise to everybody. I would never say that. This is about really figuring out how to be competitive.
America trusts its military. America trusts its Air Force. But where America is really in love with is its young enlisted force. America expects you and I to take care of that enlisted force. And that's why the question, are we worthy of being entrusted with that responsibility, is so powerful and so important. Every airman in our Air Force matters. Every airman, soldier, sailor, Marine on the Joint Team matters. And so as leaders of competence and leaders of character, I would offer to you that if you feel like the world revolves around you and you're at the center, the sooner that you can become a leader that truly appreciates
Thanks for what you're doing.
all of those that come together to make sure that the mission happens will come through loud and clear as you wander as a leader of competence and character. And 24/7, 365, we have to act in ways that are appropriate for the position we're privileged to fill. And then we have to get up each day and ask ourselves the question, are we worthy of the trust that we have been given to lead the greatest treasure in our nation's arsenal,
Enemies, foreign and domestic.
then we're on the right journey and the right path. But the measure of a man and a woman in our Air Force as a leader is actually not how high you fly. It's how high you bounce. Again, are we worthy?
Hello, I'm Ursula Phoenix Ware with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I'm here today with Dr. Nancy Messonnier, Director of the National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases at CDC. CDC has been responding to an ongoing outbreak centered in China caused by a new coronavirus. Recently, the disease caused by the virus has been named Coronavirus Disease 2019. Many people have questions about this new virus and the rapidly evolving situation, both in the United States and around the world. Dr. Messonnier has offered to answer a few questions, sharing some of what is known about this new virus. Welcome, Dr. Messonnier.
Thank you.
What is novel coronavirus?
Coronaviruses are a family of viruses that cause everything from the common cold to more severe disease. They generally circulate in animals, but they can jump to humans, and they've caused diseases like MERS and SARS in the past.
Okay. And who is at risk for coronavirus?
Right now, the people at highest risk for coronavirus are those who live in Hubei province, China. I know Americans may be concerned, but all the cases in the United States are in people who have traveled to China or their close contacts.
Okay. And how does coronavirus spread?
The data right now says that coronavirus spreads through respiratory droplets. That means coughing or sneezing.
Okay. And we understand there's symptoms. What are the symptoms of coronavirus?
The symptoms of coronavirus are fever, cough, and shortness of breath. Those symptoms are the same that you'd have with the viral respiratory infection, for example, like the flu.
Okay. So what can people do to protect themselves against coronavirus?
The most important thing for people in the United States to understand is that their immediate risk for novel coronavirus is low. We would suggest that they stay informed, but also that they take everyday usual precautions. They should cover their cough, wash their hands, and stay home when they're sick.
Thank you, Dr. Messonnier. For the latest on novel coronavirus, please visit CDC's webpage at cdc.gov/COVID-19.
The world has a long-felt magnetic pull towards the Arctic, but never more so than today. The region has become an arena for power and for competition.
At least the most surprising line to the average citizen would be from General O'Shaughnessy, that he views the Arctic as the front line of defense.
If you were, for example, putting yourself in the Russian position, if you were going to attack North America, that would be the avenue that you would likely choose.
The decreased Arctic sea ice has resulted in increased human activity, both from Russia and from China.
And that's important in a time when North America is no longer a sanctuary. We used to look at the Arctic as a buffer zone and our oceans as buffer zones, and now they're avenues of approach.
How do we ensure that we provide what the nation needs, that we arm the Secretary of State and our diplomats to go into every negotiation to negotiate a better peace from a position of strength? We don't necessarily want to fight, but we know that the best preparation and the best deterrence is to ensure that we have the military capable to win if called upon.
The Arctic in Alaska presents the United States a very strategic location. You can reach just about anywhere on the planet from Alaska in short order, in less than 9 hours. All services are represented in the Alaska Joint Operations Area, but the majority of the forces are Air Force. We have fighters, tankers, surveillance aircraft. We maintain the infrastructure in Alaska, and we maintain our long-range radar systems.
So we take care of 21 different locations, 15 of which are long-range radar sites scattered across Alaska, making sure that we are constantly watching the skies along the Alaskan border.
During the Cold War, we saw a significant amount of activity in the Arctic, all the way from aircraft activity, for example, flying the Russian bombers, as well as on both sides having increased military capability. We see some of that activity happening again today. We see them practicing attacks on the U.S. and Canada through the Arctic. They're flexing their muscles, if you will. But as we've seen the increased activity in the Arctic, we are responding in kind with the corresponding increase in the resources being applied to that.
There's great realization that with the increased human activity in the Arctic, that there's importance that our services has the ability to operate in the austere Arctic environment. Alaska provides an opportunity to train in that environment.
Our range detachment is here to take care of the Joint Pacific-Alaska Range Complex, commonly referred to as the J-Park.
The J-Park is huge. Put in perspective, the J-Park in its entirety is about the size of Ohio.
Plenty of space for aircraft to actually train as they fight.
The amount of integration we're going to have is going to be second to none. So we have the brand new F-35 out of Eielson, our F-22s down in Elmendorf, a dedicated aggressor squadron just for the 5th gen assets that are coming up here to Alaska. When I see the number of assets up here, sheer numbers and capability, I imagine people are paying attention.
The joint team in Alaska is extremely capable and professional, and I have no doubt in my mind that we'll be able to meet any challenge head on.
Our adversaries are designing and acquiring capabilities intended to limit or deny the advantages of the United States and our allies, challenging our leadership in air, space, and cyberspace. To retain our competitive edge, we're modernizing our delivery platforms and weapon systems and investing in game-changing technologies. In support of the National Defense Strategy, we are working with Congress and our sister services, industry, academia, allies, and partners to find innovative solutions to future challenges. Tomorrow's threat requires our air and space forces to think and act faster than any adversary, connecting with the Joint Force to create the most highly networked military in history. We're pursuing an integrated design and fielding a modernized force that can connect with the Joint Force, dominate space, generate combat power, conduct logistics under attack, move to win. Our platforms and systems may be the best in the world, but our most valuable assets are our people. We are continuing our efforts to develop the joint leaders essential to our future force. Diverse, resilient, and ready airmen and space professionals are the bedrock of the department's readiness and lethality. Together, we're building the air and space force the nation needs, now and into the future.
Please welcome back to the stage AFA's President, Lieutenant General Orville Wright.
Well, good afternoon. If y'all would find a seat, we'd like to take every opportunity to hear the next incredible speaker. Thank you again for this afternoon. I don't sense that the energy is waning in any way, and we're going to close up with a couple of great opportunities. And oh, by the way, there is, however you would describe it, especially for this crowd, there might be a cold drink, also known as the pool party, after the next two speakers. So again, thank you for being here. Well, as we introduce our next speaker, Responsive Joint All-Domain Command and Control has the potential, and I know we all share this understanding, to give our airmen and the Joint Force the needed decision dominance to simultaneously outmaneuver and outgun our enemies with overwhelming lethality across the battle space of today and tomorrow. This afternoon, we're fortunate to have an outstanding leader in combat air forces and proven employment expert to discuss how the Air Force will provide the joint all-domain command and control capabilities our warfighters must have to fight and to win. So please help me in join me in welcoming General Mobile Holmes.
Thanks, Orville. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Here we are in the coveted 4 o'clock speaking spot with the topic that's the same thing everybody else has talked about all day. I'm sure you're fired up about it. I'm going to do my best. I want to thank the Air Force Association for doing all the work that makes this event possible so we can be here together. I want to thank our industry partners that pay the money to the Air Force Association so that they can make this possible so that we can all be here together. I want to thank our international Air Force partners that are joining us here so that we can stay on the same page and do the things we need to do together. And what I'm going to try to do is talk a little bit about, to follow on from what Shags and CQ and Cobra talked about this morning, of how do we go from where we are with the ideas we have to make what we're talking about a reality, and what will it take from us to make that happen. But first, I'll tell you my favorite little joke or funny story right now. Many of you know, if you look around, that we have multiple old bald-headed 4-star generals in the Air Force, and we kind of look the same. And I told this story before, but Arnie Bunch and I are from the same neighborhood in East Tennessee, and people confuse us. Jay Raymond, the commander of our great new Space Force, we're also sometimes confused, to the point that I get clippings mailed to me from my, cousins and aunts. So, Mike, we're so proud of you. Here's this picture we saw. And I'll look at it and go, Arnie Bunch. Or Jay Raymond. And 2 weeks ago, when General Raymond, the commander of our Space Force, got invited to be a part of the State of the Union address, I made my weekly call to my mom and dad, and my dad said, well, why didn't you tell us? I go, what are you talking about, Dad? Well, the State of the Union. What are you talking about, Dad? Well, you didn't tell us you were going to be there at the State of the Union. I go, come on, Dad. That was Jay Raymond. And then my favorite part, Dad says, are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure, Dad. But I'm proud to be a part of that group. I'm proud to be a part of the team that works with you. And let's go ahead and get started. We start with the problem. What are we up against? And I'll talk about 2 different parts of it. But we know that China has watched what we do for the last 15 or 20 years and has tried to come up with a way to counter what we do. And I'll oversimplify it. There are a lot better experts here on it. But they invested in the exquisite intelligence tools to be able to find us and see us long before we get close to them, and then multiple long-range fire systems to be able to target us at distance and keep us at distance. And we're oversimplifying the problem. We're in a battle of long-range fires with them, and they're shooting at fixed targets, ports and airfields that you can find the GPS coordinates for in advance. Those are the places we have to be at some point. And we're trying to find and keep custody of mobile, agile, intelligent targets that are hard to find. And so they know where we're going to be, and they've invested in systems to hit us where we have to be, and we have to find them where they are. And even with the newest hypersonic weapon, we still have to find that target and keep custody of it long enough to do what we call completing the kill chain to be able to put that threat at risk. And so that means the battlefield that we're all preparing for, because of those things, has changed. And I'll simplify it to say it means that there are no boundaries on that battlefield anymore. Anybody can see anywhere on the battlefield, including our garrison, before we start. So at our bases at home, GPS coordinates are known. More than that, network coordinates are known to be able to reach out and touch us with non-kinetic tools, cyber tools, to keep us from ever even deploying. So there's no boundaries on this battlefield. There are no hiding places. When you take the sophisticated means they're acquiring and then you add the publicly available information tools that all of us are vulnerable to, where we have Facebook pictures and all those things out there. We can't hide. In general, they know where we are, and there are no sanctuaries on this battlefield. You can't say, hey, give us a minute, we just got to the port, we'll let you know when we're ready to come into the fight, and we'll move forward into the battle area and fight. So those things mean that we know those about each other. And so how do you win? I think you win by operating at a tempo that they can't keep up with, and by putting them on the horns of multiple dilemmas. You know, you heard the chief talk at a previous AFA about, you know, 1 lantern if by land and 2 by sea, and he wants to make the enemy run out of lanterns. We want to create enough options for our warfighting commanders that the enemy doesn't know where we're going to come from next, and that we can choose between those multiple options. So on the warfighting side, as CQ and his team have to get ready and prepare if they had to fight China, you have to think about those details. But we know that we're in a competition now, and that we don't wait for warfighting. And the character of warfare has been changed, and we see it every day by the information tools in this environment that we now live in. So we know that it's easy to enter for a nation state. It doesn't take a whole lot of money to build an information warfare force. You can manipulate the environment. You can threaten our ability to operate in the domains that we have dominated without challenging us in that domain, but by challenging us in this information warfare domain. And we know they're going after our abilities to compete with them. We know they manipulate data. We know that this technology is proliferating. And we know that both nation states and criminal organizations are poking around in our networks trying to steal our property to gain an asymmetric advantage. We'll come back to this, but this also offers us a way to close gaps and to make the quickest change that we can make in the balance between us and China and also Russia. So at Air Combat Command, I enjoyed listening to my brothers talk this morning that, you know, lead the warfighting organizations. Our job's a little different. We help prepare, so we organize, train, and equip airmen. We put those words in that order on purpose. We're not providing airmen to weapon systems. We're organized, training, and equipping airmen. Airmen who fight in multiple domains. We classically have said we fight in the air, but we fight on from the ground. We fight in cyber. We fight in EW. Yes, we fight in that space environment. And what do we think our job is? We think our job is to control and exploit the air, space, and the electromagnetic spectrum. So air probably makes sense. Why does ACC think their job is to control, you know, space? We think with our new Space Force partners that we're going to have to work closely, because many of the threats to the Space Force are actually on the Earth right now. And we need to be prepared to be the strike arm of the Space Force, to be prepared when called on to counter anti-satellite systems left to launch, to counter directed energy systems before they can fire against the space system, to go after the enemy's command and control and their space superiority sensors, and to be a partner there. And then the electromagnetic spectrum to us means the place where our classic electronic warfare efforts and our burgeoning cyber capabilities come together in that electromagnetic spectrum. And then if we're going to do our job to control and exploit the air and space, that we will have to control and exploit that electromagnetic spectrum. And again, the fastest way we have to catch up and address gaps, I think, is working in that electromagnetic spectrum and information environment space. It took us 20+ years to develop, you know, the F-35 and field it and get to FOC. We can operate much faster in this space, and so I think we'll have to. So that leads us to what we've been talking about all day, joint all-domain command and control for multi-domain operations. And Preston's sitting down here, and yes, Preston, I steal your slides. I steal them shamelessly. I try to stay on the same page with you and your team and what you're doing, and part of the way I do that is by stealing your slides. So we know that we need to be able to do offensive and defensive effects in all domains. And we want to support one domain with systems in another. And look, that's not new. We've learned working with our land partners that we want to put the enemy in a position that if they bring their ground forces together and achieve mass to take on our ground forces, they'll be extremely vulnerable to air forces. And if they disperse them so we can't kill them from the air, they'll be extremely vulnerable to ground forces. So we've always worked multiple domains together to create an advantage and take advantage of that. We know this capability we're building has to work in contested environments, which, as Mike Fantini says, we're going to have to fight. We're going to have to fight to control the air and space, and we're going to have to fight to protect our command and control systems and defeat the enemy's command and control systems. Seamless, dynamic, and continuous, in spite of breaks in continuity, operate at a high tempo that the enemy can't match. That's our problem. That's how we want to solve it. That sounds pretty hard. It sounds like it might take a while. And I think if we were going after it in the way we always have in our traditional acquisition method, it would be quite a challenge. But what else has changed in the world? The Air Force I joined, we talked about the military-industrial complex. You know, we had a giant military-industrial component that people were afraid would take over the country. In the world we live in now, Apple, Google, Amazon have enough cash reserves that if they wanted to, they could buy the entire defense industry. And I think they don't, because they're not sure they can make 15% return to their investors on the defense industry. But they could, and that means the money, the research money, the internal R&D money is being spent there. It's being spent in that commercial world and not in ours. And to win, we're going to have to take advantage of that. So how do they do it? Again, I'm stealing Preston's slide. But, you know, they have demonstrated a way to do similar things. I know when I fly back to Norfolk, if I get there at midnight, I don't have to have a car there waiting for me. I know that 5 minutes after I open up Uber, there'll be somebody waiting for me. We talk about pairing every sensor to every shooter through every command and control platform. They pair every rider with every ride provider through every command and control platform and update it continuously. There's technology available to do this. If you look at Waze, Waze now has cooperative people. So every driver is a sensor in Waze. And so they're telling you where the wrecks are, where the potholes are, where the car's pulled over. And if you live in an urban environment, when I lived in DC and I'd be making my way with Waze, you know, through the back roads, I learned that there are people that don't particularly appreciate that. And there are people that put a wreck in the school zone every day at 2:30 to keep the Wazers from flowing through their neighborhood. So there is anti-command and control warfare going on also inside this app. So there are ways to do this, and our industry partners are ready to help us do it. Preston and his team have developed this architecture. I'm not going to talk about it except to say it's sound. And when we had our recent Command and Control Summit, the Army and the Navy put up slides that looked a whole lot like this. Everybody kind of agrees this is the way to go. And when our young warfighters get together and look at problems, they all come back and say, we need purple command and control. It takes too long for us to do air command and control and ground command and control and Navy command and control and then try to come back together and talk about what we're going to do. We need to put it together and make it purple. So I stipulate that I agree with that, and we're going to have to make this happen. But we also know that it takes more than a new technology to make a fundamental change in the way we fight or in the way our warfare works. The literature says that to have a revolution in military affairs, you take a new technology that delivers something better to you, but it doesn't really revolutionize warfare unless you combine it with a new way to think about how you use that technology. If you just apply a new technology to what you've always done, it'll make you a little better, but it won't revolutionize the battlefield. And then sort through the organizational changes that are required to make it work. So it takes all three of those things to make a change. We've been kind of focused on that first part, on the technology. And to carry this through and make it a real revolution in the way we fight, to create an order of magnitude improvement in our capability, Salty said, you know, to get to 3 times 3 times 3 and be 27 times better. And when he talked this afternoon, we have to pair it with the other parts. So on the equipment side, yep, the connection and the connectivity that we're building through the ones is going to be critical. But to connect every sensor to every shooter, we'll start with what we have, but there's going to be other sensors that we want. There's going to be other weapons and other platforms that we want to plug into that. We got to sort through that. We have to think through what are the intel requirements for this new system that we're pulling together. What do we need to know and how are we going to know it? And who's going to do that thinking there? You know, we talk about wars of cognition instead of wars of attrition. And one of my jokes is wars of cognition need cognitors if you're going to win, right? If it's a battle of thinking, then we got to have thinkers. And a lot of those people are in our intel enterprise. It's one thing to count systems and know where they are. It's another thing to think about how we're going to defeat those systems. And the example I'd give is when we were squared off against the Warsaw Pact in the Fulda Gap, we put analysts together and they said, yeah, we can try to kill every tank, but wouldn't it be better to kill the fuel system that all those tanks require to move around and do it that way? And then we can come back and kill them all when they run out of gas at our leisure. So we need people to think through that. What are the requirements? And then we need to think about what our cyber capabilities will be required. What will be required to help us jump into this fight to protect the system that we're building, which has many attack surfaces to cyber threats because of all the communications we're doing, and what will we need to operate against the enemy? That's the hardware side and software side. And then the ConOps. The Joint Staff is working on a joint concept for Joint All-Domain Command and Control. You need a place to put humans together to go figure that out. We've nominated our Shadow Operations Center at Nellis as a place to do that, and so we'll need to equip it with people and with an iteration of the ones to be able to run the apps that we'll run to do command and control and start figuring out how real people will command and control forces using these capabilities that we're building. And we're working toward doing that. And then we've got to train people to be able to operate in multi-domain environment. Salty talked about our 13 Oscars. That's a step along the way. But we'll need a place to train, and we'll need time and opportunity to train. Right now, our AOCs, as good as they are and as effective as they are, they're kind of busy every day serving a component commander, and we're going to have to make sure that we provide them with the capability to train, which means having enough people to have some people training every day and having a robust, realistic system with constructive forces to command and constructive forces to fight in multi-domains so that they can work through this and practice it. Air Combat Command, we've taken the first steps toward this organizational part. So I talked about the change in warfare, talked about ConOps and how we're going to get to that. How will we figure out the organizational part? It started with bringing 24th Air Force over into Air Combat Command for us, and then the next step was putting 24th and 25th together into 16th. We plan on organizing into two main elements there, conventional forces and information warfare forces. We've done the second part, and Tim Hawk and his team are finalizing what will that combined staff look like after we put the two staffs together, and what will the operations center look like that's able to command and control all the forces that he brings to support combatant commanders. And then they'll work on their wing structure eventually. If we were building these wings from scratch, how would we put the forces together to focus on problems and more and less on geography? Because we know you don't fight Russia just in EUCOM, you don't fight China just in Indo-PACOM. They're a worldwide threat, and we're going to have to focus on those problems. We plan to move our conventional fighter, rescue, and command and control forces together under the numbered Air Force currently known as 9th Air Force. We'll see whether it needs a new name when we do that or not, but we want to bring them together so we can get the same synergy out of them. So that was our first step. And then the chief has asked us to look at how we present forces into the joint world. And over the last 15 years, we have sent you as airmen, not as a squadron most of the time. We've sent you as unit type codes or UTCs from your squadron, maybe as small as 1 airman or 2 airmen. And then we've put you together downrange into teams that are kind of ad hoc teams, not teams that train together, prepared together, and we're ready for combat together, but teams we put together once you arrive. The chief has asked us to look at how we present those forces and to find a way to be able to present forces in larger elements again. Instead of small pieces that go to a base with the wing commander already there, what if you have to open up a base and you're going to bring a whole wing in? So we're thinking through those parts of what he asked us to do, and that means we have to have a wing that can go forward and establish a base, defend that base, sustain the forces there, receive follow-on forces, command and control those forces, and then generate and project combat power even under attack from the enemy. Our wing commanders are working to do that, but let's face it, we took resources away from our wings and we streamlined them and we've tried to make them as efficient as possible to support peacetime garrison operations, because we were under budget pressure, and that's what you do when you're under budget pressure. You peel away everything that's not necessary for day-to-day ops. So it's going to take a few more people. My wing commanders think it's really in the number of less than 50 to try to give them the wing operations center they need without robbing the squadrons to do it. And it's going to take some comm gear. It's going to take equipping them to be able to link into theater command and control and to be able to do the missions we're asking them to do. To present those forces forward then to the Joint Force through our service component commanders. And then below that, we want to optimize the squadrons in that wing. Now, you know, we've done some experiments at Mountain Home. The goal of that experiment, we had 3. The goals were to empower squadron commanders and revitalize squadrons, and we went after it in that experiment by removing a layer of leadership, with the fairly simple idea that squadron commanders would have to do more and have to take more responsibility. Our second goal was to look at if we could draw a line between line work that squadrons are responsible for and staff work that serves the whole wing, so that squadron commanders could focus on their line work. And so we pulled up an A staff to support the wing commander and to do wing functions. And then the third part was to try to right-size squadrons so that a commander and a superintendent could know the people in their squadron and be immersed in their daily mission. So we had squadrons with 800 people in them, and we had squadrons with 70 people in them, and we wanted to right-size that mix. That's been successful. We've achieved those goals. It's not the only way to do it, but it worked there. We'll continue to experiment and fine-tune that. We'll move that experiment and expand it to Seymour Johnson this summer, as the deputy commander for ops at Mountain Home becomes the wing commander of the 4th Fighter Wing at Seymour Johnson. And we'll keep looking for ways to address those 3 goals. Meanwhile, after I'm about a month short of 3 years in the job, it takes a while to convince people that you want to know their ideas and you want them to try new things and experiment. It's one thing to say, go do it. When I was starting to try to do this in A58, we put all the tools out there for innovation. I borrowed them from SOCOM. They had some really good ones that were well used. And 6 months later, I was waiting for the first person to use them because they did not believe I really meant it. And so we went to what we call the Freestyle Friday. We said, hey, on Friday, once a month, you can work on whatever you want. As long as it's related to an Air Force mission, anything you're interested in, work on it. And my guys would go, that's good, but what do you want me to work on? I go, well, anything you want. They go, yeah, but what do you want me to want to work on? You know, is this a test? No, it's not a test. But ACC's wing commanders have bought into this idea, and so we've achieved what I would call catastrophic success in innovation attempts, all designed to meet those same goals that I talked about, but different, some different ideas at every wing. 1st Fighter Wing is putting ops and maintenance together, but keeping their groups. 4th Fighter Wing made some changes to think about a wing operations center and executed Rapid Forge, and they're looking at changing the way we train pilots in initial training in our FTUs, which could spread from there. The 20th Fighter Wing focused on pushing authority and responsibility back down in their maintenance squadrons, and last week they separated their giant AMXS into 3 squadrons, 3 maintenance squadrons, 1 aligned to each fighter squadron as part of this experiment on pushing things down. 23rd Wing is doing their own take on some of those things. Working through the packages here. The wing at Davis-Monthan has looked at what they call the dynamic wing and how will they think about deploying as a wing. General Brown talked about, hey, we need a little more camping and a little less glamping. Johnny Bravo and his team have taken that to heart. You know, when they deploy with their own sleeping bag, their own shelter half, and a stove, and they're not waiting for anybody to build a tent city for them. They're coming ready to fight. And then at Mountain Home, they're FOC, but they're fine-tuning. The 388th Wing at Hill is looking at their own take on how to push authority and responsibility down to maintenance. The 9th Reconnaissance Wing is looking at their own idea, and our 480th Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Wing has completely revolutionized the way we do intel support for service components by focusing on problems and not on platforms. So a lot of new ideas out here, and I think it's great. And I trust these wing commanders. I'm going to let them try what they think will work. And they are smart, and so are their teams. And if it doesn't work, they'll say, that didn't work. We're going to try something else. But that's how we're going to work through it. We're conducting a series of experiments to guide them through it. We did Rapid Forge last year, where we deployed ACC units over to USAFE Africa and worked within their command and control system to do dynamic force employment in an agile combat employment method. We hope to do another big Rapid Forge West this year. Right now, there's a little risk of that because of the continued deployments to CENTCOM, and then another one in 2021. The idea is that we'll support those wing commanders' organizational experiments with these exercises so that they can fine-tune what we've asked them to do in a realistic environment. And then in about 2022, the next COMAC will pull the wing commanders together and say, okay, what have we learned? And now let's go back and kind of re-standardize where we are. I don't think there'll be one answer for every wing in Air Combat Command, but we'll group wings that do similar things together and do some re-standardization. And then ultimately, to secure this revolution, it'll take other changes. We'll have to go look at Air Force policy on how we manage talent, on how we develop people, how we spread out the tasks. We'll have to go look at how we certify and inspect our capabilities and make sure we're ready in this new environment. There'll be some new kit required, primarily comm gear. We're going to look at organization. We'll have to train our airmen different. If you're sending airmen out in multi-functional teams, your airmen need to be able to do more than one thing. And we found in our Rapid Forge exercise that that was one of the things our airmen really enjoyed, was getting a chance to move from an office environment to be part of a team in an airbase squadron that was generating combat power in Europe. And then there'll be some equipment as well. We will work with our brothers and sisters across the Air Force and in the Air Staff to try to work through these second-order implications and settle on an organizational structure that'll let us make the most out of the revolution that Joint All-Domain Command and Control makes possible. Mike Fantini, again, talked this afternoon and told you that our air and space control is not a birthright and we have to fight for it. And I think he's right. And I think we can fight for it, and I think we can still control the air and space. There are people that think we can't. I believe we can. I think we have a path toward doing that, and I think we can do it together. And it's important that we do it, not because we want to, but because the joint force and the American way of war depends on us to control the air and space. And when we get it right, this is a picture from the 2003 invasion of Iraq. This is a group of soldiers that are making their way to Baghdad. They've been on the road for about 2.5 days here. They're exhausted. They're taking advantage of the daylight to take a break. They parked their vehicles to protect themselves from the threat they're worried about. What does this tell you? Anybody? They're worried about a ground threat, right? They're worried about small arms threat. They're worried about mortars from people on the ground. So they put their vehicles in a circle for some protection. They've dug some holes to be able to get below shrapnel from a mortar so that they can safely take a nap, and they're going to rest a little bit and move on. They are not worried about attack from the air, or they would be dispersed. They know that overhead there's a satellite constellation providing continuous monitoring. There's an RPA and ISR enterprise that's keeping an eye on their flanks, and if they get into trouble, the entire weight of the U.S. Air Force will come to them rapidly to take care of them and keep them safe. If we get control of air and space wrong, if a nation does, it looks like this. So this is the first Iraq War, and this is what happened to Saddam Hussein's force when they tried to leave Kuwait without being able to control air and space. You could substitute an airfield here. You could substitute a ship with its decks cleaned off. This is what happens to a force that doesn't control the air and space. So this is our sacred trust. This is what the Joint Force depends on us to do. We can do it. And this is my call to arms, that taking advantage of the things that are being provided that can change the way we fight in Joint All-Domain Command and Control, that we, this government, uniform industry team, can do this. And the Joint Force depends on us to do it, and nobody else will. So thanks for your time. I have cleverly exhausted all 30 minutes of my time, but you can ask your questions to the General Scobie and General Hike and General Pierce that are coming up next. Thank you.
Oh yeah, we cannot thank General Holmes enough. 3 years at Air Combat Command, incredible innovation, leadership, and your forces, our combat air forces deployed around the world. We'll talk about that in the next session. Sir, just humble. Thanks for your leadership.
Thank you.